Hello, and thank you for joining me for yet another review of a classic science fiction, this time After Things Fell Apart by Ron Goulart, which I have here in a rather pretty little Arrow edition that is in good condition. I think the spine is interesting. The spine makes it look as if it's trying to mimic what the doubles, but it isn't a double, it's a solo. And you've got this here on the back. I'm not entirely sure if that man is meant to be Goulart or not, or maybe a character. The cover is very Goulart. I think if I had been asked to pick an author from the 70s-ish who this cover might apply to, I think I might have picked Goulart even without his name actually on it. By the way, I don't think the art is credited anywhere in this book. I couldn't find it. So Ron Goulart, in case you haven't heard of him, and I feel that there's a certain amount of people who won't have, was an American author of mystery, fantasy, and science fiction. He was prolific. The interesting thing about that is that if you go to Google him, first of all, he comes up as a historian of pop culture, and that interest definitely comes through in this book, as in several other ones that I think he has. There are humongous number of pop references thrown in, and I only probably got a fraction of them. If I got 10% of them, I would be astonished. Okay, so Ron Goulart also wrote under many pseudonyms. He wrote dozens. He wrote for comics. He wrote movie adaptations of books. He wrote novels, and he just wrote huge amounts, so much. Now, I first encountered him somewhere in the 80s as the author for Vampirella, because Vampirella is awesome. However, I also back in the 80s read quite a bit of his work, because his books were literally everywhere where I was. They were in the second-hand bookshops, they were on the shelves of people who would occasionally loan them to me. Often, I might add, next to those little paperback novels of Playboy jokes. That's the sort of shelf they really belong on. Anyway, I had a bit of a hit or miss relationship with his work. So, at best, they were okay and I liked them for the science fiction, but I didn't love them and I didn't hang on to any of them when I came back to Australia, which I regret. I regret not hanging on to the Vampirellas because I've never been able to replace them. And Ron Goulart in general, I have not read anything by him for a couple of decades at the least, probably more. Now, After Things Fell Apart is a book set in an alternative world, America. It is part of his world. He's got these world building scenarios, and one of them is actually called Fragmented America. There's, I think, half a dozen books in there, and this is the first one. So the America it's set in is no longer United States. The various parts of the country have ruptured due to internal fractionalism and politics and I don't know what. They now operate spasmodically and semi-independently. At one point we hear that Washington fell apart. There was also a short-lived Chinese invasion of California, which has led to California being independent and a different state. Different state to the... I don't even really know how to describe it, and Goulart doesn't terribly well either. Part of this book happens in California, but we start in San Francisco, where a lot of Goulart work is set, I believe, where our main protagonist is John Haley. He is a private inquiry officer for a semi-policing organization, and he's been called in on this case by the San Francisco police to chase the Lady Day gang. So we learn there are dozens of different levels of fragmented policing, and that Lady Day is operating to kill key important men, many of which in San Francisco. Lady Day organization is also called mankill.com or something like that, though that doesn't happen very often. These are women who dress up in black, so think kind of cross between a gym enthusiast and a dominatrix, and they're masked, and they kidnap these guys or kill them on stage or whatever. Haley has to pursue them across the different parts of America, taking us with him through this very fast-paced tour of all the weird and wonderful scenes, locations, and concepts that Goulart dreamt up for us. Some of these sites include the Nixon Institute, where aging former rock stars, authors, and politicians record their memories under quirky situations, and someone tries to kill Haley for no apparent reason. Another site is the wide open sin town of San Rafael, which is run by the amateur mafia. No Italians allowed in the amateur mafia. Plenty of zany in that whole scenario for you. And there a couple of different people try to kill Haley, one for no apparent reason, one for, I guess, maybe there's a reason there. There's another one, Vienna West, which is a cross between a health retreat and a voluntary psychiatric retreat, and it's based upon Sigmund Freud's 19th century city, and someone tries to kill Haley, of course. And then finally, there's the Mechanical Jazz Festival. Mechanical jazz is a type of music that he mentions often. I believe he's satirizing something. I've got no idea what. Anyhow, various odd characters are thrown at you often and tell Haley and the reader all about themselves in exhausting and quirky detail before being thrown under the bus and vanishing forever, one sentence or one paragraph away from where we first met them. They don't advance the plot in any way. The dialogue is almost universally silly, the situations are ludicrous, and none of the characters are meant to be even remotely believable, and you will either love all this or you won't. So that, in short, is the superficial outline of what this book really is allegedly about. I know, there's not a lot of plot there so far. No, there isn't. It's about the quirk. So, reading this book, I remembered why I stopped reading Goulart, even though he wrote SF, which I liked, and it was everywhere, which was useful. It seemed to me kind of as if with Goulart you read one book and you have essentially read them all. There's not often a plot that you are interested in following, that you care how it resolves, or that makes any sense. It's about the actual writing, with the plot as extremely secondary, and what his books are actually like from the reading perspective is that there may not even be a plot and you either like it or you don't. Now, Goulart himself was very much part of the science fiction SFF writing scene. He was admired, he was acclaimed, he was part of the In Club, and generally celebrated as a smooth writer of dialogue-driven stories. Now, I will totally agree that the writing is smooth and professional to the max. It's also slapdash and not over thought out, which makes sense when you look at the volume of work he produced. I feel like his work characteristically was stylized satire in the extreme and archaic, I don't know, humor that is not always easy to follow, and for me often wasn't very funny. Now, Goulart was nominated twice for the Edgar Award, and this 1970s book was one of the ones that he was nominated for. I don't believe he actually won for it. Now, if this fragmented America in any way sounds familiar to PKD readers, I get it. When I read the back of this novel, I actually was thinking of The Man in the High Castle. I don't think that the actual reading experience is terribly close, and I don't know that the two books influenced each other. Man in the High Castle, I'm pretty sure, was published a few years before this one. But the two authors did know each other, and for all we know, they would have discussed fragmentation in America. And possibly they even discussed a plot device that has someone traveling all the way through America to be exposed to all these different environments that the author has dreamt up. So, what did I think of it? Well, I thought of it what I remember thinking of it in the past. I found it very zany and very quirky. And I don't mind some quirk, but this was very deep quirk. This was such deep quirk, one drowned in it. Satire, I do like. This may be satire, but I never really got the majority of the humor, and I often had the strong feeling that I was missing 90% of what he was trying to get at. And maybe I just have insufficient familiarity with whatever he was satirizing in the pop culture background of America in the 70s. So it fell quite flat for me. And I'm not sure that I think it's admirable writing if the technique leaves it feeling quite this flat for the reader. So because I didn't find it very funny, I don't think I really found any of it what I'd call funny. Not Gerald Durrell funny, not Douglas Adams funny. Quirky, yes, absolutely. Zany, without a doubt. But funny, not for me. And because humour, satire, zany and quirky seem to be the whole thing that Ron Goulart is aiming for, a lot of it fell very flat for me. Now what I do like, and always did like about Goulart, and why I did keep going back for some time, was how random, creative and off the cuff his future science concepts are. There's a lot of them. In the opening scene, for example, we've got John Haley being introduced to what his mission is going to be during an earthquake. San Francisco, right? And the earthquake knocks the coffee machine off the bench and the soybeans go everywhere. Now that's the sort of thing that most sci-fi authors would build on. It's like, why does a coffee machine take soybeans? Future something or other has happened there. Goulart doesn't bother with that. He just throws that at you and you keep going. It may never be mentioned again. Here it isn't. During the same earthquake, the data storage units are affected by the quake and malfunction. When they malfunction, they start barking like dogs. Again, that's a really fascinating tidbit. The way he describes the data storage units of the future is actually pretty cool. They're kind of like large, boxy, mobile and very verbal computers. And all the computers, robots, technology has backtalk in here. So his equally quirky yet interesting scene setting is something that I do enjoy. I like his scene setting. I wouldn't call it world building because there's not enough investment in it for it to be world building. But the scenes are interesting. You've got a motel run by escaped FBI agents who address each other by number and fingerprint or footprint any potential guests. There's a soup kitchen and a pharmacy where you need to get past automated systems giving them the right responses in order to get in. That would have been complete SF for the 1970s, but also pretty prescient in its own way, because if you read it today, you need to get through a lot of automation in some industries before you find a real person. So another thing I probably should mention about this book, and it didn't really strike me to the end, is language and content warning. Now, Goulart does mention sex a lot in every single book of his that I've ever read. He doesn't go into graphic sex. It's all more this thing that someone always talks about. In this particular case, it's another co-agent whose name I've forgotten, La Pena maybe, who on any single occasion when he pops up, which is a lot, he's talking about having sex with women. Not a problem. I don't mind that. It's not really a plot builder because it's just there all the time. What will be a problem for some people, and only became outstandingly noticeable to me in the last third, was the wording. Now, I can't find any indication that Goulart really objected to same-sex and people who engaged in same-sex. But in this book, he uses language that would have been offensive in the 70s and would be deeply offensive today. So you've got women labeled with every misogynistic label you can imagine, and I think that's just part of him trying to create the language, but it is unpleasant at times, but not nearly as offensive as the fact that most of his characters are in fact same-sex oriented, and that they get called dykes, faggots, pansies, and many other names that are not in current use today, and I hope my YouTube doesn't get cancelled for this. Again, it's hard to tell if the author actually has negative views on these people, or if this is just part of his quirky, zany scene setting. I don't know. And in a way, it's nearly impossible to think of it as him treating characters negatively, because they're barely characters. You can barely claim that there's more than one character in this whole book. You've got stereotypes, you've got cutout images who talk a lot, an awful lot to each other all the time, hence the dialogue-driven book, but not really characters. So I don't know if these constant references, they're not going to land for many people, I've just got to say. Anyway, so there are good things about his writing. I've mentioned them, the things I like about it, his science fiction concepts, his scene setting. Some of the dialogue is mildly entertaining, if not memorable in the long term. It can be quite hard to tell who is saying what also, because the characters are so minimalistic. If you enjoy this, and many people do enjoy this, don't let me put you off. If you like zany, quirky humour, lots of humour, funny dialogue, fast back and forth, or if you've ever liked any of the many things that Goulart wrote. He wrote lots of comics, he did a lot of Marvel, I believe. The Vampirellas I've already mentioned. He wrote for Tech Night, I think. He's written a lot. And if you like his writing, you're going to enjoy this. It certainly is easy to read, fast-paced, and does not require any in-depth thought. Though, like all Goulart that I remember, he does actually have social commentary. And the social commentary is real, but it is so deeply hidden in the zany and the quirk that uncovering it is like a full day's work, and I'm unsure how often I can be bothered to work that hard for so little return. So sadly, for me, the good bits are not enough to bring me back into the arms of the great Goulart universe. I've got this book, and I've read it. I've got one more from one of his world building, I think it's Shaggy Planet, that I will read one day. And that might be it for me and Goulart for another few decades. Anyhow, thank you for watching. If you like the zany and the quirk, maybe try some Goulart. If you've got Shaggy Planet and you want to read it with me, let me know. I think my reading schedule's opening up in a few months. And in the meantime, have a great day and read good books. Always, always read good books.